So welcome to Let's Talk Leisure. Welcome Michael Switow into this podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Steven. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. All right, well, first, let me say I think it's great that Brick Bookings is doing this series of podcasts with people from the attractions industry from across the world. I think it's a great chance for us to learn from each other. As you said, my name is Michael Switow. I'm based in Singapore. I'm a writer, author, and theme park consultant. I've been covering the attractions industry for a decade now. I'm the Asia Pacific correspondent for IAAPA's Fun World magazine. I'm an author of a book called Taming the Mouse, How a Small Hong Kong Theme Park Came to Dominate Disney. There you can see it right there. I wrote this in collaboration with Tom Merman, who's an absolutely great guy, and he used to be the head of Ocean Park Hong Kong. It's a David versus Goliath story of how any business can beat giants. And what we did was we set it against the backdrop of the attractions industry. Hong Kong Disneyland was coming to town. And back at that point in time, everyone thought that Ocean Park was toast. They said, there's no way it's going to make it. But Tom Merman and his chairman, Alan Zeman, they completely transformed the park. And every year for a decade, they kicked Disney's butt in whatever metric you want to take, whether it's attendance, profitability, revenue, community engagement, they did it. And so we pull out 10 lessons, 10 principles that anybody can use, any business can use to beat giants.
I guess we cannot get all the 10 lessons because people have to just see and read the book. But what caused you to write the book, Taming the Mouse?
So I think the story is kind of interesting. I was doing a feature article about Tom Merman. He had been guiding, leading Ocean Park Hong Kong for about 12 years and was preparing to step down. Mm-hmm. And I had interviewed him several times over the phone from Singapore over the years. But for this story, I went to Hong Kong, where I used to live, and I did this interview with him in person. And first, I met with his director team, and he wasn't in the room. We had breakfast together. And I noticed that, first of all, they had a really good camaraderie together. And second, not a single bad word about Tom. They all had like really great things to say about him, and they weren't kissing up. It was all really authentic and sincere. Yeah. And then when I met Tom, he spent the entire day with me. He didn't have to. He could have spent 30 minutes, an hour, but he spent the day talking with me, walking around the park with me. And he's just really an authentic, nice guy with amazing lessons. And, you know, one thing I noticed as we're walking around the park, he would bend down and pick up a piece of rubbish and throw it away himself. Or the frontline staff would... Yeah, he's the CEO of the park and he's picking up trash, right? Because he knows it should be a clean park and it's not beneath him to do that. And then there's like, you know, someone who's frontline staff selling sandwiches or ice cream, and they wave and smile to him, you know, and everyone knows him and they're happy to see him. And I just thought, this is really, you know, a neat guy and he's got a great story to tell. So after the article came out, you know, he wasn't quite sure at the time what he was going to do. He since went on to Universal Studios, where he opened Universal Studios Beijing, which is a $7 billion project. Oh. Yeah, amazing venture there. And now he's back in the US supervising several parks. By the time he didn't know what to do, and he didn't know exactly what he was going to do, whether he's going to be a consultant or go back to academia. And I just said to him, you know, have you ever thought about writing a book? And he said, no. And I said, well, you should. You have a great story to tell. I think you have great lessons that people can learn from. We talked about it, and then we took it on.
Without any experience of his side, with the experience of your side, of course?
Well, I mean, he had the experience, the lessons from the industry. He had been working in theme parks since he was a teenager. When Disney told him out in California he was too young to hire, and Knott's Berry Farm said, sure, come on in, we'll let you sweep. You know, he thought it was going to be like a summer job. And then he just learned there actually is a career to be had here, and he worked his way up. So he brought that experience with him. I brought, you know, some of my knowledge with the theme park industry, but really my communication skills to tell an exciting, engaging educational story. We brought that together, and you know, the output there is Taming the Mouse.
And what's the story exactly about? I know
so as I said,
everything, but.
Yeah, it's set against this backdrop of Hong Kong Disneyland coming in, people thinking that there's no way Ocean Park could survive. But what Tom and what Alan did was they completely transformed the park. And we pull out quite a number of lessons. And I think actually, even before I get to the lessons, let me tell you a little story. When they were interviewing Tom to be CEO, and he flew in from, at the time he was working in Spain. So, he's worked in 3 continents in the theme park industry.
Yeah.
And they were interviewing him at the time. They thought they were going to close down Ocean Park Hong Kong to renovate it and then reopen. And he said to them, he goes, no matter what you do, whether you hire me or not, don't do that. You do not want to close down because you're going to lose your audience completely. And they said, you don't have to close down. He said, no, of course not. In our industry, we know you can just work on one part of the park or you keep the other parts open and then you rotate it around. Yeah. And this way you keep the buzz going, you get people coming in. If you close down, they're going to forget about you. And he really impressed them. And, and then they hired him. And, we have a great story to tell as a result.
And they went with it, right? With this idea. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly. They did not close down the park. They kept it open. They went through a huge renovation process, completely revamped the park. And I'll tell you, if you haven't been there, it's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, you got to come out and visit. It is one of the prettiest parks in the world. It's on the southern tip of Hong Kong Island, and it's mountainous. It's by the water, the South China Sea there, and the topography is just absolutely gorgeous. I lived in Hong Kong in the late 90s, and there's a cable car that will go from the entrance up the mountain. And they still have that cable car, and they also now have a vernacular as well. Mm-hmm. But when you're on that cable car, it's just so beautiful. And I'll tell you, Alan Zeman, who's best known really for Lan Kwai Fong, which is an area of restaurants and bars, he was kind of new to this industry in a way as well. And he didn't want to come on as chairman initially, but the head of Hong Kong, the chief executive at the time, Tong Chi Wah, asked him to a couple of times. So he went down to Ocean Park to visit. He hadn't been there in a while. And the moment he saw it, he said, you can't close this place. This place is Hong Kong. And then, they took that and like I said, they ran with it.
I'm still really curious because Disney came, right? And the book is there, the story is there. So what are the learnings that you have to share with the audience from your book, or what can you share?
Okay, so first off, I think what we can take out of this is that anybody can beat a giant, and there are a number of ways to do it, and you just have to think through it. And I'm not going to go through all the lessons right now, but I think one of the key ones that really helped Ocean Park Hong Kong was value. And there's 2 types of values. You have your core values and your differential values. So core values, that's what any company talks about when they talk about mission statement, vision, values, but often they just write it down, put a poster on the wall, and that's it. You got to think through those values. What are they? And then you have to make sure that they're embedded in your operations and that they're authentic. So when Tom first joined, they went through an exercise where they reevaluated what the values were. They had 4 core values. They revisited it every year. They only changed it once in 12 years. And the reason they changed it was because they were expanding from being basically a theme park where people came, a marine park where people would come for a day at a time, to being an integrated resort with water park, hotels. And they said, okay, we need a couple more core values, and they expanded it to 6. So first you got your core values. But then you also have differential values. And this is something which I think a lot of companies don't think about, right? So differential values, Stephen, are what make you stand out from your competitors. There are a couple INSEAD professors some years back. They wrote a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. Mm-hmm. And it was essentially, you don't want to be in the part of the ocean which is really crowded, where the sharks are. You're going to end up bloody. You want to find, a spot of blue ocean. So what Tom did with Ocean Park Hong Kong was he said, what are our differential values? We do not want to compete directly with Disney. They are an 800-pound gorilla, and they will stomp us, right? And that's why people think we're not going to...
Don't even go there.
Don't even go there. So, what does Disney have? Disney's got an amazing brand. Disney has great characters and intellectual property. It has money that it can spend on technology, right? So at Ocean Park, let's not worry about intellectual property. Right? They have Mickey Mouse, they have Donald Duck, they have Cinderella. We're not going to try and counter that. They can spend a lot of money on expensive rides and the latest technologies. Again, we're not going to beat Disney at that. But what are our differential values? So I mentioned the topography, what a gorgeous place it is. Mm-hmm. Second, there was this generational connection at Ocean Park Hong Kong where people had gone there in their youth and they wanted to bring their children there. There's no way that Hong Kong...
Generations.
Exactly. So it's that generational connection, and there's no way that Hong Kong Disney could compete with that directly. Yeah. I'll tell you one of the biggest differential values, and Alan Zeman summed this up great. He was asked at a press conference, right? What makes you stand out from Disney? He goes, Disney, they have the fake mouse. talking about Mickey Mouse, right? He goes, we have the real one. And what he meant was, we have the aquarium, we have the giant pandas, we have other animals, we have the real thing. And that is what makes us stand out. So I think whatever business you're in, see what makes you stand out from your competitors and focus on that.
Yeah, but what I also hear then is that they stay true to themselves, right? So they didn't change with the coming of Disney. They stayed true to themselves and only expanded that what they already were.
Yeah, they definitely stayed true to themselves. They explored again what it meant to be true to themselves.
Yeah.
So they talked about being Hong Kong's People's Park.
Yeah.
So it was a park really that had to embody the culture of Hong Kong. It wasn't a fictional land like you would have, on Main Street at Disneyland. So they stayed true to their culture. They had that generational connection. They catered to the local audience, but also having things for overseas visitors. And they expanded their aquarium. They made it much more modern. They'd always been a park that had rides. They did improve on that as well. But you had this diversity there that again took advantage of this amazing location. And they did such a great job of being innovative, of getting the mission out, that at one point they were getting nearly 8 million visitors a year.
Wow. That's a number. Really curious to see it actually now. Really exciting. Are there any more lessons you would love to share, or do you think people have to read the book as well?
Well, they definitely have to read the book, okay? And, just to give the pitch, it's in Amazon, it's in any of the, online bookstores, wherever you do your online shopping.
We'll put the link.
And if you happen to be in Singapore, it's in our national library. You can check out a copy for free.
Awesome.
But, I think if I were to share another lesson with you, and it's hard to pick and choose, but one that I like is control the controllable. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a lesson that applies in business, but also in our personal lives, right? So when something goes wrong, we tend to focus on that and we talk about it and we fret about it, often if it's outside our control. And I think the attractions industry witnessed this, like never before over these last couple of years with COVID-19. So if there's something that you can't control, don't spend your time focusing on that. Focus on what you can control. So in the case of Ocean Park Hong Kong, there were things like changing exchange rates, where all of a sudden they became a bit more expensive than they were before for visitors who were coming in from mainland China. Yeah. There were political protests, which again maybe made mainland Chinese feel like they weren't as comfortable when they were actually a very big audience for Ocean Park Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. Well, as Tom would always say, you can't change the weather. But what you can have is you can have something inside. So when it rains, people still have something fun to do. And in the case of like COVID-19, if people can't cross borders, what do? You don't necessarily close down, assuming it's still safe to operate. What you do is you focus on the domestic audience instead. And so what we find is if you really break a problem down to its constituent parts, there's usually, basically you can always control it. Just focus on what you can do.
I love this. Thanks so much for these lessons. Appreciate it. Hey, and if you can go to a next phase in this conversation, and I'm really curious to see your take on the leisure industry from where you are viewing it. What are the trends you're watching in your area of the leisure industry?
Look, I think the leisure industry, the attractions industry, it's all about having fun, right? And people want to have fun as much as they ever have. And to some extent, there's a sense of, my gosh, we've been cramped up for a couple of years. We want to get out again. At the same time, there is a bit of angst. People want to be safe. They maybe still have some consternation about being in large groups. Mm-hmm. So attractions definitely have to pay attention to the safety measures. And I think they've been spending the last 2 years thinking about that, both how to adhere to government guidelines, which are changing, but also to be able to meet those needs. I think before this whole COVID-19 pandemic came in, Asia Pacific was really seen to being the heart, the biggest place of growth for attractions. And I still believe that to be true. I just did a story, it's coming out in the May edition of Fun World, about the attractions industry in Vietnam. Yeah. And I'll tell you, last time I did a story about that 2-3 years ago, there was a sense of enthusiasm and so much was happening. And it got put on hold. But they're back in that mental position now, not just mental, dollars, lots of projects in the pipeline of things coming through. So definitely an exciting region to be in for the leisure and attractions industry. And I guess the other thing I would add is innovation here is just so amazing. And I'll share an example of that with you if I can. I went to a park in southern China on Hengqin Island, right near what's a near town called Zhuhai, next to Macau. So not that far from Hong Kong. And yes, it's been very hit by COVID-19 and by the closures. But before the pandemic started, Lionsgate opened an attraction there, Lionsgate Entertainment World. And it's inside a shopping center. It is a vertical theme park. Okay, so first off, it's innovative in the sense of how it's built. It doesn't take a huge footprint, a lot of land to have a great attraction.
It's really vertical. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not a family entertainment center. This is definitely an indoor theme park with a virtual reality roller coaster and with all sorts of rides and attractions. But I'll tell you what really struck me there. It was a ride, and I got to say, it is the best virtual reality experience I've ever had. It's called the Dauntless Fear Simulator. Steven, do you remember the Divergent movie series?
Yes.
So in Divergent, young people, they hit a certain age, and then they have to go into one of, I believe it's about 6 different clans. Yeah. You know, some are known for being dauntless because they're fearless. Some are, you know, they have more home skills, etc. But you have to go through a test. And what they've done here in this attraction is with VR gear. So you put VR goggles on, you have a backpack, you have gloves. Sometimes you put sensors on your feet as well.
Really immersive.
It is unlike anything you've ever done. You repeat this test that they do in the movies. So it's like you're on top of a building looking down and you see a can. You actually, I think, can kick it with your foot and it tumbles, right? And then you have to walk across this gap, right? And it just feels so real. And they put physical things in there as well, so that you have this tact in the space. Yeah. So like you don't see it exactly because you have the goggles on, but like it's a brick wall. So when you touch it, right, you have this tactile experience that integrates perfectly with the virtual reality world.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just, you know, when I was there, people were queuing up 3 hours to do this attraction, to go through it. And you would only do a couple people at a time, but it was so impressive. And the reason I'm sharing that with you is because I think the innovation here in Asia Pacific is just so great.
And that will cross over to the west part again.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you know, in a lot of the rides and the manufacturers come from where you are in Europe, but the biggest growth in parks is out in this part of the world.
So we should all have a look over there, right?
Oh, for sure. Come on out. Yeah. Come visit.
I think that brings us to the last question. Do you have any last things to share? Anything you would love to share with the audience after this talk?
Oh, well, there's so many things. We could take this conversation in a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
I think I just want to share one last lesson, which I got from Tom, which I think is just really great for anybody to think about. And it's catch people doing things right. Okay, so when you're a leader, it's very easy to criticize and critique and look for things that are wrong and then tell people, this is wrong, don't do this, you got to do this better. But if we take a moment to actually look and be open for what are people doing right, and then to praise them and encourage them, you create a culture where individuals are engaged and where it's a happy place to work, and your overall productivity is going to be better. And for example, at Ocean Park, Hong Kong, they had a system where they were rewarding people. Tom was writing handwritten thank you notes. In his 12 years, he wrote 15,000 handwritten thank you notes. Yes, it's amazing. Yeah. And at one point, there was a suggestion from the front line saying, hey, we would like to be able to recognize people too. Can we put suggestions in? And all his managers said, no, don't do that. They're going to abuse the system. They're just going to put their friends in. Tom said, well, let's give it a try. Let's see how it goes, right? It turns out that the frontline staff were even more, I won't say critical, but they were used more discretion in who they nominated than the managers, because they're right there alongside everyone and they know if someone's really doing a good job or not. But it meant something to the people who get that recognition. One day there was a frontline staff, a woman who motioned to Tom, come over here. It was in a locker room. She brought him over, show her locker, right? Opened it up, and inside was the card she had gotten for employee recognition and the handwritten note. She had them laminated and put on the inside of her locker.
All right.
Because it meant so much to her and she wanted to share that with Tom.
Yeah,
So I think that's a lesson we can all take home with us.
100%. I will take this to heart. Thanks so much, Michael.
It's a pleasure being here to chat with you, Stephen. I'll give a little plug for my own website. It's revamped, up and running, switowmedia.com.
Yeah.
So SWITOW media.com. And if anyone has questions or needs help with any communication issues or anything to do with theme parks and attractions here in Asia Pacific, give me a call.
I believe there's more stories here. So let's speak soon.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.